Anthony of Egypt is someone you will most probably never have heard of. That's because he died a long time ago. He was born in the middle of the 3rd century and lived actually for just over 100 years, so did very well. He was orphaned when he was aged about 20, and he inherited his parents' estate in Lower Egypt. But he was also on the path to becoming an ardent Christian. And he couldn't get out of his mind the words of Jesus in Matthew 16. So that's something that Anthony chose to do. He sold his estate, he packed off his younger sister to a nunnery in Egypt, and then went to live on the outskirts of the city with a hermit, where he worked as a swineherder. He found life there a little bit too exciting. So he took it upon himself to go out into the Nitrian desert, about 60 miles from Alexandria. He lived there simply, living a life of very little, eating 1 meal a day, sometimes going 3 or 4 days without any food at all. But he still found life there a little bit too hectic. So he moved again, and he moved into an old abandoned fort, where he then spent the next 13 years of his life. He had no contact with anybody, and he only ate because people from nearby towns would occasionally go and throw food over the wall. That lifestyle, however, still proved to be a little bit too hectic for Anthony, and so he left the city and moved out into the Nitrian desert, about 60 miles to the east of Alexandria, and there he lived a very simple life. He ate only about once a day. He would sometimes fast for 3 or 4 days. But even there, he didn't feel that he was quite fulfilling everything that he should be doing. And so he moved again and moved into an old abandoned Roman fort where he spent many years. He only ate the food that people from the nearby towns might throw over the walls for him, and he had virtually no human contact. And it was in this isolation and in this wilderness that Anthony felt that he was fulfilling his mission to God. Now, I think it can seem quite strange to us in this day and age to think of isolation as being something that is a mission from God. To us now, isolation is something that is a punishment. It's a torture even. Isolation is where Virgil Hilts found himself and his baseball in The Great Escape. It was where Cool Hand Luke was placed after fomenting yet more trouble in prison. And yet, in the Bible, the wilderness is quite often indicated as a place where people can go and can find a new experience of life, a new understanding of themselves and of God. Perhaps we do this most famously in this time of Lent, when we commemorate the 40 days that Jesus spent in the wilderness, which itself mirrors the 40 years that the children of Israel spent in the wilderness, following on from their exodus from Egypt. But it wasn't just Jesus. Many people had those wilderness experiences. Moses, Elijah, King David, John the Baptist, even St. Paul, we're told, spent time in the deserts of Arabia. Some of those people went into the wilderness, sought that isolation willingly. Some of them not quite so much. Elijah certainly falls into this latter category. Feeling that his mission and ministry from God had failed, being hunted by Queen Jezebel, he set off into the wilderness to escape what he saw as certain death. And it was in that time in the wilderness that he confronted the living God. And he discovered God not in the furious sound of the earthquake, not in the crackling of a fire, but he heard in the isolation, and only in the isolation of the wilderness, the still, small voice of God, the voice that gave him confidence, that gave him reassurance, the voice that picked him up and set him back on his feet and sent him to complete the mission that was given to him. In a different and yet similar way, we read in the Gospel according to Mark that Jesus also, after his temptation by the devil in the wilderness, was ministered to by angels. he found there new encouragement, new hope, new vision, and a new direction forward. Isolation in whatever form may not be something that we want. It may not be something that we hope for or expect. It may be something that is imposed upon us. And yet, being imposed, it gives us all the opportunity to stop, to think, to pray, and in our own hearts and in our own lives, listen to what the still small voice of God has to say to us today.